Hello, everyone, and welcome to my channel. We have as our guest today, Andy M., who I actually met through YouTube, and we've talked on the phone, and it's been great getting to know him a little bit. And he's on to share his story today of growing up traditionalist and finding the wider church. So thank you so much for coming on, Andy. It's great to have you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Oh, sure. No, it'll be fun. All right. So we shall take it away. Maybe kind of start out just introducing your childhood and teen years a little bit. Let us kind of get that picture of where you began.
Yeah, absolutely. So my traditionalist beginnings were with the Society of St. John in Scranton, Pennsylvania. This is a fairly low profile group that not a whole lot of people know about, and that's because they were only in existence for about 5 years. So a little bit of history with them. They got started in the late 90s. They were founded by Father Carlos Urrutia, who taught at the SSPX seminary in Winona for a little while. He had pretty lofty dreams about starting a group of his own. He was subsequently expelled from the SSPX in 1997, if I remember correctly. He brought a couple of adherents with him to form their own little group. He had some big dreams about his group. So he approached the bishop of the Scranton diocese in the late 90s to start his own group. It was met with approval. They were given a pretty substantial loan to set up in a what they wanted to do was create a kind of Catholic village, as they called it. So they had, and it really was beautiful. I mean, it was hundreds and hundreds of acres in the Pennsylvania woods. It was down into a relatively secluded area. There was a creek running through it. Big nice buildings. It was really, really nice, and I have some very good memories from there. But they came to a screeching halt in about I think it was 2003. I was very young at the time, so I didn't quite know what was going on. But they were shut down by the new local bishop, who there had been allegations against them, sexual abuse allegations, financial mismanagement allegations. They were not in the good graces of the authorities. And then the new bishop came in and, as I understand it correctly, was not very favorable to any sort of traditionalism groups. So he said, all right, you guys are out here. So so they were disbanded. But then again, I was, I think I was 7 at the time, so I did not understand what was going on. I just knew that we had to move for some reason.
Oh, no.
So
sad.
yeah, I was not very aware of the situation. I just knew that we had to move. My dad got a job in Kansas, and I just figured we're moving to Kansas because that's where Dad found a job. I had no idea about Trad World or the groups or the branches or anything like that. I just knew that Dad found a job in Kansas, so we're moving to Kansas.
Okay.
So that was early 2000. I think 2005 is when we moved. So we moved to Maple Hill, Kansas, to attend the Fraternity of St. Peter chapel and school there. They had opened up in 2002, and they were kind of hitting a stride of more and more families moving to the area. So my parents wanted to include us in that. Again, I didn't know that St. Mary's was 10 minutes down the street. I didn't know about any of this stuff. I just knew that this is our new parish now. And kind of along those same lines, I didn't know that the Latin Mass that we had was kind of, I don't want to say irregular, but rare. I thought this was the Mass. This is how it is everywhere. This is what everyone has. I didn't know at all that this was a rare thing or a very exclusive thing. So I just figured this is how it is. My first Novus Ordo Mass was not until I was in like 5th grade, I think. I went to a funeral for my dad's cousin. And my parents were very good about explaining that, before we went, my dad said, this is still the Mass. You're going to see some things that are a little bit different. It's going to feel a little bit different, but it's the same thing. And you'd probably be able to recognize some of the texts and stuff because, I served Mass. I had to know the translations. And, as we were going through, I was like, oh, obviously Gloria, Creed, Agnus Dei. Like it was pretty easy to pick up on it, but it did feel a little different. I wasn't what I would call scandalized, but I was just like, okay, that's new, that's different. And I didn't attend another one until college, probably like 2015. Um, so the Maple Hill saga continued until about I'd say the early 2010s. It was probably like 10 or 11. When I was just starting high school, the school was kind of getting on some rocky footing. There were some issues with the staff. Some of the parents were disagreeing with, some of the priests there. There were families just packing up and heading over to St. Mary's because they were tired of stuff going on. It was not doing very well. So my parents pulled us out of the school. We homeschooled for 1 year that was for my sophomore year of high school. And then my parents decided to send us to St. Mary's Academy for a couple of years. So I attended St. Mary's Academy for my junior and senior year of high school.
How many siblings do you have?
I have 6 siblings.
Okay, so there's 2 of you.
Yes,
so your mom had 1 year of homeschooling. She was like,
she was like, no, I'm done.
Oh, no.
We homeschooled when we were younger for, I think, until like 3rd grade. But, there were only 3 of us at that point. I think she could handle it. But once you got a couple high schoolers, she's like, nah, this isn't for me.
No.
So, my one older brother did 1 year at the academy. I did 2. And then, the younger ones were in there for a little bit longer. I did junior, senior year of high school at St. Mary's Academy, and then went on to I went to Kansas State University, which is about 35 minutes away from St. Mary's. I started attending the campus church there, Novus Ordo Church. Wasn't super invested in my faith at this point. I would just, I said, I have a Sunday obligation to fulfill, and I would rather walk 3 blocks to the campus church than drive 35 minutes home to Maple Hill. So, and I thought it was fine. The priest did a good job. It was a nice chapel, and, I had no beef with it. So that was more a regular occurrence. I would drive back to Maple Hill occasionally, if I wanted to visit family or whatever. At this time, I was also working for a company based in St. Mary's that had expanded to a regional office in Manhattan. So there were lots of St. Mary's, SSPX adherents kind of mingling with the college kids crowd, which was a little bit of friction. That's, that doesn't blend super well. There were a couple people from St. Mary's in some of my classes at K-State. So, I was still all this time kind of interacting with them and, even if not attending their school, still having a foot in that world.
Yeah.
Right. So, I started dating my now wife during junior year of college. She was born and raised in St. Mary's. She'd only ever known, St. Mary's, SSPX, that kind of stuff. But she was more open to the issue. She wasn't completely sold on everything. She was just, thinking, this is what I know, this is what I do. But once I started introducing some new things, she said, okay, yeah, we can talk about stuff. So after a little while, when we started talking about getting married, I made it very clear to her. I said, listen, I've had some bad experiences and I don't agree with them. We will not raise our kids in the SSPX if we are going to get married. And thankfully she was very receptive to that. She said, I get it. That makes sense. We can talk about it. So that was an ongoing conversation that was, thankfully pretty fruitful. She just needed a little bit of exposure to, other Catholicism outside of that. So, when we were dating, we would go to, we'd go to Maple Hill one Sunday, and then we'd go to St. Mary's the next Sunday, and we kind of flip-flop just so we, could kind of break the ice a little slower. And then she came to a campus mass, a Novus Ordo mass with me one time. I think it was for a First Friday or something, and I'd missed the morning mass. And she found it a little off-putting. She didn't love it, but she was, she also had no problem acknowledging that, yes, this is the mass. This is fine. It's not what I'm used to, but it's legit. So, that was good. We then we got married in St. Mary's with the local bishop's approval. I will add that little caveat. Probably one of my biggest regrets, as we'll get into later, but what's done is done. Can't do anything about it, so it's all good. So we got married in St. Mary's. We moved to Kansas City for my job. The Institute of Christ the King has a church in Kansas City, so we started attending that out there. We just found it a little nicer than the fraternity church out there. So we said, let's try something different and see. And again, really, really beautiful, beautiful church, beautiful ceremony. The Institute really knows what they're doing. So we were there for about 1.5 years. And then during COVID, I started working from home. We decided we'd rather move back to kind of small town living than live in the middle of Kansas City. So we moved back to Maple Hill, started attending the fraternity church there again.
Yeah.
But the conversation had been ongoing up until this point about, trad world and our issues and just things we talked about. So that had kind of been, opening it up. So a bit of a retrospect on kind of all of those things. We had seen how, after coming back to, sort of disconnecting from Maple Hill for a while and then coming back to it, we were seeing how there was a lot of similar mindset as we had experienced in St. Mary's that we did not like. There was a kind of exclusionary attitude, this kind of like we're set apart from everybody. The standard trad issues that permeate them. I don't have I don't have any issues with like the fraternity as an organization or the Institute as an organization, but we were kind of seeing and feeling the same things across every traditional sort of parish that we were attending, and weren't super on board with all these things. The people are very nice and everything was, we met people very easily and it was fine, but kind of the ongoing conversations we were having, we were like, I don't know if we're quite feeling this. So then I'll save the follow-up to that for later, but that's where we found ourselves. And then recently we're having the conversation of, is this something that we want to continue to do? Is this what we want for our kids? Our parents clearly wanted it for us, but we had to make the choice of, is this what we want to continue doing, basically?
Right. Yeah, no, it's really interesting. I mean, things that I've heard from other people who lived in the St. Mary's area, either FSSP or SSPX, like they kind of talk about the way people are like coming in. And I think it's interesting. I don't know if you could speak to the difference between like adults, the adults of the families who like chose that and moved there, and like their attitude versus the kids that just grew up knowing nothing else. Because you guys, I mean, you're raised in traditionalism, but yet you have this kind of openness, or this, you don't seem like you're just glued to one thing or prejudiced against other things, really.
Yeah, it's the traditionalist mindset has not stuck with the younger generation as much as maybe it once did. There's there are, I think, more and more people like around my age, I'm 26, who are who grew up in that kind of world and are starting to shed it a little bit. You'll see if you've interacted with the movement online or whatever, you'll see that a lot of the discourse is dominated by people who maybe have discovered it within the last couple of years. But the ones who have been raised in it, from the late 90s, early 2000s, we're starting to kind of see that maybe it's not all it's cracked up to be. My sister was still in St. Mary's Academy for a while, and even she was saying how her classmates were kind of giving some pushback on some of the the narrative, the talking points that were taught in their religion classes. Like even high schoolers are starting to see like that doesn't quite make sense. And now that's with SSPX issues, which are different and we'll get into, but the world of traditionalism, I guess, is there's some turnover, we'll put it that way.
Yeah. Okay. Because I've definitely run into that in my own experience of meeting people, that the younger people who were raised in it, they don't usually stay.
No.
And so that's really interesting because their parents are so convicted that this is what you need. Like, if we don't do this, you're not going to be raised with good formation or whatever. And then it's like they grow up and they're kind of disillusioned. And then they're like, there's actually more than this. And so, what you're saying is just good, because I think there's a lot of people out there that can relate to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I've got some I got some notes here to kind of hit more on that topic, but
Yeah.
it does seem like a generational thing. My wife and I have discussed this, where, our parents' generation and the generation before that, who were really in the midst of all the big shakeup, 50 years ago or something.
Yeah.
They're really attached to this, and they see this as kind of their anchor. And but the rest of us who, did not experience the weirdness of the 70s and 80s, and who are seeing it as it is today, we're kind of like, guys, what are you talking about? It's not that bad. It's,
Yeah.
we
Come a
don't
long way since.
we don't have these things anymore. So
Yeah, right.
yeah.
No, I had a priest on yesterday. I think you were tuned into that, but he
Mhm.
was talking about how he's like, tell me where you can still find a church where there's any liturgical dance. And I
Right.
was like, yeah, I haven't heard of one like actually happening for like 20 years.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I mean, it's somewhere, it's possible, but I was just like, you're right. It's really on the way out. Even since I was a kid, and hearing stories of what my parents experienced, and they never, went trad because of what they saw. But yeah, it was like, it definitely was a thing, but it's like, it was this like bubble that just kind of burst, and then it simmered down. So you're right. We're in a very different place as a church. Like things are getting a lot more stable, and the next generation of priests coming on are, by and large, I mean, any of them that I've met, they're very fervent and like liturgically minded, and they're Orthodox. And it's like, ooh, we're getting into some good stuff. Like the old liberal stuff that's literally dying. Like the old people are kind of the last vestiges, the few that still are like that. And they weren't all like that, but yeah, they're going out.
No, yeah, certainly. I tell people all the time that, we got inundated with these horror stories of clown masses and all these things. But I said, I've been to quite a few, Novus Ordo masses at quite a few different churches, and I have never experienced anything except strict by the rubrics celebration of the mass. Like, yeah, there was a guitar at a mass one time. That's the only thing I can think of that made me kind of raise an eyebrow. But everything else was perfectly fine. I did not experience any of these aberrations that everyone tells you about. So I think that also helped to kind of to break the narrative in my mind a little bit. I was kind of like, you guys are telling me one thing, but I'm really not seeing it.
Right. So even being trad, both of you and your wife, but dating, getting to know each other, I mean, what kind of tensions were there with her family, or like, just those two worlds coming together, even though they were similar, but it's like, there's definitely differences between the FSSP and the SSPX. Do you want to talk?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. So, her mom was more open to it. Her mom was totally fine with it. She said, it's mass. Why do I care? Her dad is pretty attached to the SSPX, but he has he has warmed up to it as well. He didn't care that we were going. He came to our first child's baptism, and he actually proxied for our godfather because he wasn't able to be there. But we didn't exactly hide it. We were just I said, this is what we're gonna do. I don't want to beat around the bush about it. I don't want to kind of walk on eggshells. Like, it's what we're doing, and I'm sorry if you don't like it. But yeah, it was a little bit tense at first, just because she was, it's a new environment. There are times when people will kind of snoop and report and say, oh, did you see, so and so at that church over there? Why were they there? So I know the first time she came to Maple Hill with me, she was a little nervous because she was like, what if someone sees me? What if someone tells other people that I've been here? And I was like, well, do you not see how that's a problem? That it sounds like they've got other issues to work on. We're just going to mass. It's fine. So it was a bit of a slow start, but eventually she was, completely warmed up to it. So it was good.
Oh, that is good. Okay. And then like, I'm really interested about your parents sending you to the SSPX school. I mean, that had to be kind of a compromise for them. Like, well, we just feel like we have to, but I mean, how did they deal with that? Like, did you guys talk a lot at home about what you were hearing and kind of like sort things out? Or did they just kind of leave you to figure it out if you heard something funny? And what was that like?
So yeah, my parents were of the opinion that it's a Catholic school in town, and it has a good education, and maybe it teaches some stuff that's a little out there, but we can trim that out. We can talk about it when you get home. We can clarify that that's not the case, whatever these things are. But and with the utmost respect to my parents, I think maybe they underestimated the effect that it would really have. That's a really great segue into my next part of my notes here, actually, because I was just about to get into some stories from St. Mary's Academy and some of the things we had to deal with. So
give us the scoop.
yes. For those who are wondering what it's like, let me explain it to you. So the first thing that really made me start being hesitant was I remember junior year of high school, we were talking about the new mass, and we had to write a 1-page essay answering the question, is the new mass Catholic? And obviously at an SSPX school, you are expected to answer in the negative. I answered in the positive because of course it's Catholic. What kind of question is that? And I got a 65% on that paper. No notes or highlights or markings or anything indicating why I got such a low grade. I mean, and 65 is a barely passing grade. 64, you fail. So, so the priest handed it back to me and he said, listen, you're not getting this grade because you go to Maple Hill. And I was like, yeah, but yes, I am, though. Let's stop. So that was weird. And then senior year, the whole second semester of the year was devoted to the crisis in the church, right? So we got to talk about all those fun topics. And we got the standard SSPX talking points here about, Pope St. John Paul II was canonized when I was a senior in high school. So that took up some of the conversation in religion class. He's not really a saint and blah, 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 right? We got that, had a whole explanation of why, we can't go to Maple Hill. You can't be going to Maple Hill. I mean, they knew I went. I was sitting right there. Not very tactful about that.
You're a lost cause. No.
Yeah. So, and then of the local church in town, the local diocesan church, I'll never forget I won't name him, but the SSPX priest who was teaching the class, he goes, yeah, these people across the street, they're not Catholic. Oh, sorry. Are we still?
Oh yeah.
Sorry, one moment.
No, we're good. You're still showing and sounding and everything.
Okay, sorry. One moment. I got some. I think I duplicated my tab accidentally. Okay, sorry about that. I'm back. All right. So that was
not Catholic. Well, I mean, that's just putting it plainly. I mean, that is really what they think. I mean, if you had to press them to state it like the logical conclusion of what they believe, then yeah, I mean, anybody who follows the Novus Ordo isn't.
Right. So yeah, they were. That we got that talking point. There was a sermon one time when I went to mass there, where the priest was, again talking about the new mass, and he's like, "That's a Protestant mass. We can't be going to that mass. You can't go." So, by process of elimination, I was like, "Well, we can't go to the new mass. We can't go to the fraternity. So you're saying we can only go to you guys? Is that what you're telling me?" And they'll, they won't come out and straight up say it, but it's that's what they're saying. Yeah. My wife's friend one time when we were when she told her that we were going to Maple Hill, her friend said, oh, but what about compromising your principles? Do you really want to compromise with Rome? Do you really want to go back to Rome? And I was like, do you hear yourself right now? That is not good. One time, a college student in St. Mary's at their college asked, what's going to happen when our bishops are getting older and, we need to consecrate more bishops or whatever. And the priest, just very casually said, well, we'll go ahead and consecrate new bishops and I guess we'll get excommunicated again. Just whatever, to the amusement of everybody. Everybody laughed.
To the amusement of everyone. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was a bit ridiculous.
Wow. Okay.
So let me see if there was anything else I had on my list here.
I remember you saying to me something about once in a while during, I think it was religion class specifically, whatever teachers you had, sometimes they would say stuff you were like, did I really just hear what I thought I heard come out of their mouth, and like text some of the other kids later and be like, did you hear? Did they really say this? And they were like, yeah.
That was for my my marriage class.
Oh, that's when that was. Okay.
Yes, we'll I'll jump to that one. Well, okay, I have like one or two others here, and then I'll talk to you about that one. So the majority of men in St. Mary's are employed by this place called the Onyx Collection, right? Which is like a marble shop. Everybody, Okay. So one time when I was dating my wife, we went, we were in St. Mary's for Mass. And the sermon for this Sunday was, and I swear I'm not making this up. The priest said, we know who works at Onyx. We know how many of you work at Onyx. We know what your paychecks are. We see how much you're giving to the church, and you're not giving us enough. Give us more money.
What?
I swear I'm not making that up.
Oh my.
I was so mad when we left. I said, how dare he? This is ridiculous. It was, I could not believe my ears. And then, yeah, so that was, during the dating period. And then, my marriage class, this is a doozy. So
Oh, no.
let me preface this story by fully acknowledging that this is not a position that is held by the SSPX. I understand this is like a one-off. It was just a priest saying some weird stuff. I understand and I acknowledge that this is not what the SSPX teaches because it's so ridiculous. So I just want to get that out there before anyone accuses me of claiming that the SSPX teaches this as an organization. I understand that they do not. But during our marriage class, the priest said, and I'm going to quote verbatim because it's seared into my memory.
Oh, no.
The priest said, if you homeschool your children, you are excommunicated. He said, you will be treated as a public sinner and you may not receive Holy Communion if you homeschool your children. I didn't even know what to say. I walked out of there and I said to my, she was my fiance at the time. I said, did I hear that? And she said, yeah, that was weird. And I said, surely I did not hear that. Surely I'm making that up in my head. I texted, like you said, I texted several other people who were in class with us. And I said, did you hear that too? Or is that just me? And they said, yeah, no, we heard that. So then that was our second marriage class. For my third one, that was a one-on-one with the priest. And I emailed him beforehand. And I said, hey, I seem to remember you saying something about like some kind of repercussions or something like discouraging homeschooling. Can you just clarify what you meant by that? And he said, we'll talk about it when you get here. So I got there and he said, yeah, I think you misheard me. I didn't say repercussions. I said excommunicated. And I said, oh, okay. So you're doubling down on it. You're actually for real about this. So I sent the rector a very long email explaining this whole thing and I never heard back. So again, fully acknowledged, the SSPX does not teach that as a group. They do not. No. But I find it very odd that the SSPX will tell you one of the reasons to not go to the local church, right, is because you might hear something weird from the pulpit. You might hear some unorthodox things. You might hear some weird things. And yet they're saying things like this in their marriage classes to people who I would hope know that that's not true. But whenever I bring that up to someone and I say, I hope people realize that's not true, people familiar with St. Mary's go, yeah, no, there are people who will believe that.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
that's not the only priest that I've heard of say similar things from the SSPX. It's that they do, some of them very actively discourage homeschooling because they're like, your kids are not going to get what they need. And like, you're not really qualified enough to teach. You need to send them to our schools. But of course, their schools, because the SSPX is the only place to go and their schools are the only places then worthy of educating your children. So it's like, well, that's very convenient for you, isn't it?
Which is ironic considering that their schools are mostly staffed by like young moms. Like the teachers are, they've got a couple on the roster that have, actual credentials, but most of them are just 23-year-old girls who went to their college for 2 years and that somehow qualifies them to be a teacher at their at third grade level or whatever. I mean, they'll harp on how, parents aren't qualified enough. And I'm like, 80% of your staff is just young parents. What are you talking about? So
it doesn't add up.
Yeah. So that was very odd. Another story, more recently, I don't remember if I mentioned at the beginning, but we just moved. And so when I was filling out our registration sheet for our new parish, one of the requirements there was, your baptismal dates. I didn't know my wife's baptismal date. So I called the switchboard in St. Mary's. And they said, oh, do you need it for the SSPX church up there where you guys are? And I said, no, we're not at the SSPX church. And she got a little flustered and she was like, oh, is there a fraternity up there? Are you at the fraternity? And I said, nope, we're just at a diocesan church. And she got very she was, clearly a little flustered about it. When I hung up, she called my mother-in-law to make sure that I was not some imposter trying to gain like my wife's baptismal date, as if I could do anything with that. For one, that's not exactly
Right. Not like your
private
social
information.
security number.
Right, exactly. So
Mm.
yeah, and so that was very odd.
Yeah.
And then so this kind of, all of these things, and my wife went to K through 12 at the academy, full full thing. She'd experienced the whole thing, she'd heard the whole thing. And as we kind of looked into this a little bit more, and you and I have kind of talked about this, and this may be a subject for a different video or some another time, but and I started doing some digging, and especially after all of the abuse allegations came out, and all the some problematic history and all these things, and I started doing some digging, and I realized if you look at the criteria that are defined for a cult, whether religious or not, just any cult, the SSPX meets a lot of the criteria, and it's a little bit frightening. I'm not going to get into it too much here, but there were things that there were points, if you look up characteristics of a cult, and there are bullet points that they give you, and I was going down through them, and I said, this is like word for word. I mean, there unquestioning commitment to the leader of the group. You can't, his word is regarded as the highest thing, the truth. Discouraging dissent, or even punishing dissent from the group. This kind of us versus them mentality. It's us versus the world, us versus the SSPX versus the fraternity, or whatever. The claiming that the ends justify the means. Cutting ties with your family and friends so you can be part of this group. Like, it's kind of scary how many of these things they check. And I don't want to just like slap the label cult on them, but a lot of the things that we had experienced and that we had seen, I was like, yep, I'm checking every box on this list here. This is a little bit frightening. So
right, like compared to the rest of the church, it's not so in the rest of the church. I mean, obviously there's pockets where people will get weird, or certain communities or certain priests, but it's like, as a rule, like the church is not in favor of that, does not support it. And generally you won't encounter those things in any normal parish situation. So yeah, it's definitely distinct from like the wider Catholic world. Right.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, these things,
it was plain as day.
Yeah, no, I had never heard of any of these things, before, being in an SSPX classroom. So, and experiencing their kind of, town life and all these kinds of things. So, so that was a bit of an eye opener for us. So, so then our whole change in mindset, around the whole subject was, we were both still pretty tratty when we were getting married, and when we lived in Kansas City, we were still kind of on that train, and we wanted to belong to a traditional parish, but there were a lot of things that happened over the course of the first year or so of marriage that made my wife, especially because she grew up in SSPX, but also me, kind of say, this is a little strange. This doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. I remember the first thing was at my friend's wedding, which was just a couple months after we got married. It was a Novus Ordo mass. It was very, very well done, at the request of the bride and groom. The groom is a good friend of mine, and he requested that we get some of the more traditional elements in there, and it was wonderful. It was really, really well done. But he has family from St. Mary's. They came, and they didn't participate at all. They didn't receive communion at all. They were just there. And my wife afterwards said, this is a little bit hypocritical, that you would come and recognize the legitimacy of this wedding and acknowledge that, by extension, yes, that it must be a legitimate wedding, a legitimate mass, et cetera, but you won't receive communion. It seems like you're kind of prioritizing your ideology over, communion with Jesus Christ. So she found that a little bit odd. There was we found there kind of a double standard with like public Catholics, Catholics in the public eye. I remember when Kobe Bryant passed away, all of our, SSPX friends were going, oh, but did you know he was Catholic? Did you know he received Holy Communion the day he died? And I'm like, oh, so now it's convenient when, when it's for a celebrity, but, but otherwise you would frown upon it. That seems very weird. So then the all the abuse allegations came out a few months after we were married. Some of them with connections to us. Father Ramon Angles, who was, a big name in the reports, actually baptized my wife. Father Rudigoiti, who, set up the Society of St. John, who was also accused of things, baptized me. There were many people involved in the allegations that we knew. Some of them, my wife even went to school with. It didn't impact us directly. And, we weren't affected necessarily by it, but we were starting to see that it's a little too close for comfort, kind of. So, and all this time we were in Kansas City, we didn't really fit in with the Kansas City traddy crowd. Like I said, they were very nice, but they were hardcore trad. And we weren't quite on that level. So it was a little hard to kind of find our niche there. So we had started to branch out a little bit. We'd go to confession just at the local church down the road. Sometimes I'd have to go to mass there for work conflicts or whatever. We were just kind of opening up some different lines, I guess. And then, and then we moved back to Maple Hill, and the Maple Hill crowd had changed a little bit as well. There was a lot of people had come from surrounding towns, during the COVID boom when everyone was discovering the Latin Mass. People had come and flocked in, and, and they were being, influenced a lot by the fraternity, the Maple Hill crowd, which, I don't necessarily want to disparage, but I was hoping that, bringing in other people, I was like, oh, we can bring some normalcy into here. We can kind of balance things out a little bit, and didn't exactly shake out that way. So then kind of looking ahead, our whole perspective started shifting very quickly and through various experiences, all kind of around the same time, in like 2022. So I have a kind of list here. So the first thing I remember, we went to a Byzantine Divine Liturgy when we were on vacation in California. Beautiful. Loved it. But there were some things about it that, again, we found a bit hypocritical. It felt much more like a Novus Ordo to me than it did a Latin Mass. There were certain practices that, trads usually disparage, like lectors and like standing for communion and for, the vernacular and all these things that usually they'll have an issue with, but when the Byzantines do it, it's totally cool and they love it. So I said, that seems a little bit contradictory. That seems very odd. And then I was offered a discount on an Airbnb because someone I knew the owner, and he was an SSPX member, and we were offered a discount because we were traditional. We were traditional Catholics, and I said, I don't like that. I do not like that we are giving favors and privileging our traditional brothers and sisters over just your everyday Catholics. That seems wrong to me. So that did not sit well with me at all. And kind of this whole time we had been engaging a lot more contemporary Catholic resources. Like, I've been reading a lot of Scott Hahn. We've been listening to Pints with Aquinas. We were listening to, Trent Horn and Jimmy Akin and all these guys who are very, very intelligent. And, they were helping us a lot in ways that, all this time in traditionalism really had not done anything for. We kind of saw the passion with which they spoke about the faith, and that it didn't have anything to do with the rite of the Mass. They cared about Jesus Christ and growing closer to him, and not they didn't care about the shortcomings of their fellow Catholics down the road. It was an aspirational thing, not a looking down your nose kind of thing. And I remember I sat down, I called my brother, who had he had obviously grown up with me in the Traditionalist movement, but had not attended since he moved a couple of years ago. And I was asking him his opinion on this. I realized that trads love to complain about issues like, people dressed immodestly in church, or, poor catechesis, or the standard, trad stuff, but they don't actually do anything to fix it. They just kind of sit back and gather in their little trad circles and their little trad bubbles, and they just hunker down where everything is perfect. And they don't do anything to fix it. And I said, that seems very weird to me, that if we have all these issues, we're just going to like sit back and wait for themselves to, or wait for them to either die out, or, for people to figure it out themselves, instead of, going in and actually helping them. I found that very strange. I started to notice that bulletins and parish functions at other local churches were always recommending events and groups and talks from other churches, and they all felt very connected. They all felt like, oh, the bishop is doing this function, or this speaker is coming to to Kansas City, or whatever. They recommended all these things, but our fraternity chapel in Maple Hill just didn't. We had everything is here. We do all our functions here. We do everything with each other. We're not very connected to our fellow Catholics at all.
Yeah.
So we went to confession to a local priest one time in St. Mary's, who this confession experience was just probably the greatest confession I've ever done. Like, it really helped to both of us to see confession as a place of healing, and not just this kind of reset button or this restart where it's like, sins erase, okay, try again, like, because that's kind of what we grew up with. But it didn't, we didn't have this real experience with it at all.
Where was this confession? You said it was St. Mary's?
This is in St. Mary's, but at the diocesan church.
Okay.
Yes. Sorry, I should have clarified that.
No, you're good. I'm like, which one? There's so many churches in this place.
No. And I read something recently in a book that I thought encapsulated it really well. It's in Edward Sree's A Biblical Walk Through the Mass. And he says, God does not merely want to pardon you like a judge. He wants to forgive you like a friend. He wants to heal you like a physician. He wants to be reunited with you as your beloved. And that really hit me, because for us growing up, God was like the judge. He was the, just waiting to deal out punishment or whatever, right? And we did not get this real good, healing experience. So I contacted that priest. I said, I would really like to just have a sit down with you and explain some things. And I told him that, I was having my issues with the trad world. We were saying, I wanted my kids to use, current Catholic material like books and other public figures, and engage with Catholicism as it is today, not as we would like it to be. I want them to read books that present the Mass as it is right now, not as this special thing that we have, right? And I'm not trying to downplay it, the old form at all, but all the books that we had growing up were like these old, like photocopied black and white, pictures of like the Mass. And then I'd see these books of the story, that I think Tan publishes one called like Father Ben Gets Ready for Mass. It's his kid's book. Okay. But if you're raising your kid's trad, you can't give him that book because he's doing the Novus Ordo, and you'd have to explain all the difference in all these things. And I was like, I don't want to have to do that. I don't want to have to explain to my kids constantly growing up that, like, oh yeah, but we do it differently actually. And, I didn't want that. I wanted my kids to, to be able to experience, maybe as they got older, like teenagers, like, going to conferences and events and going to, seek or whatever, and not having to explain to them like, hey, the Mass is going to be different here. I just wanted them to just know what it was, and to kind of have a balance. So I said, we appreciate what we've been given, and we definitely still want them to have that, but I also want them to just know Catholicism as it is. So I told him we'd like to start bringing our kids to the, his church, the local diocesan church, maybe once or twice a month, just to kind of get some exposure to it and see what it is, and, and know what it is. And, that once or twice a month started becoming once or twice a week. Then it started becoming on Sundays. We were just really enjoying it. I remember the day when my wife said, I actually really like the English Mass. And I was like, yes, we're there. So it was such a good, edifying, wholesome experience. It was giving us something that, 20 plus years of traditionalism just did not. Trads will balk at that statement, but we learned, we grew, we got stuff out of it. We grew in our faith from this thing that, we didn't have growing up. And it was really great. So, after a little while, we kind of mutually came to the decision that, we don't want our kids growing up in trad land, in trad bubble. We don't want them being locked into this little world where, it's kind of frozen in time, and we don't have any connection to the outside church, let alone the outside world, Right. So, we both experienced some pretty unsavory things in St. Mary's. We we'd seen a lot of people just stop practicing altogether, both from St. Mary's and from Maple Hill, because, once they leave their trad bubble and realize that it's not really adequate preparation for, the world at large, they just kind of go off the deep end. And I completely understand that not all the things we have now, like certain podcasts or books or speakers or anything, were available back in the early 2000s. So I don't blame our parents for not giving us these things, because obviously they weren't there. But we were finding that we were learning and growing so much more from engaging with the Mass and the faith and everything just as it is, not as we'd like it to be or some ideal that we want, right? So so we just said, if this is the way things are going, then I think we should just follow it.
What an idea.
yeah
What renegades you are.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. So kind of just some thoughts on the whole thing. Sorry, I didn't know if you had any questions or anything before we go on. But
I'll tuck them in later.
Okay. So some thoughts on this whole thing is that the church, and especially the Mass, has mission at her core, right? It's all about mission or going forth or spreading the dismissal literally says, "Go forth, the Mass is ended," or sometimes go forth and share the gospel, or what have you, right? But I was thinking, how exactly are we doing that if we're all just leaving church and staying in our little trad bubble, where we're all taught the same thing, we're all thinking the same way, we're all learning the same stuff? We're not growing. We're just kind of stationary. We're kind of static, and everything is nice. Everything looks good, and we all seem to be on the same wavelength, but we're not going anywhere. We're kind of stuck. I think why a lot of kids fall away as soon as they move out or get out of that world is that they've never had to, bring the faith to anyone in a meaningful way outside of their little bubble. And then when it gets challenged, when they meet people who don't understand it and they want to ask them questions, it just kind of falls apart because they don't know how to defend it or how to explain it or anything. My wife told me that their priests in St. Mary's would berate them for not bringing in any converts. They'd say, "Why aren't you bringing people into church?" But, it's not exactly surprising to me. You don't see a lot of converts coming to the traditional communities. Even Father Ripperger, who the trads champion, he has an article or a talk called 10 Problems in the Traditional Catholic Movement. And I have a quote from him here. He said, "It's never been part of the Catholic religion to be in isolation, shunning people. How are you going to evangelize people? How are you going to attract people to Mass? You're not. Why? Because there's a natural human psychology. People aren't going to go to some place where they know people are looking down on them." Further down, he says, "You're ending up with the same kind of phenomenon you're seeing among the Amish. The kids just end up bolting from the traditionalist movement because they can't stand the fact that things that are perfectly okay are being denied from them entirely. So we're having attrition rates among them." And that really hit kind of home for me. I said, yeah, he's really onto something here. We're locked in our little bubble. As a priest friend of mine put it, we're frozen in amber. We're perfectly preserved, but we're not going anywhere. We're not growing. We're not learning. We're not developing. We're not going with the church. We're just kind of staying here.
Yes.
And I was not. I was not about that. I remember the day we went to my parents' house before we moved, and I just said, "Mom, I'm over this traditionalist thing. I don't think it's for us. I don't think it's what we want to do. I don't think it's how we want to raise our kids. I respect that that's what you wanted to do with us, but I'm kind of over it." and I just don't think that that's where we want to go. I think we really started changing our minds when we had to acknowledge that the liturgy and the state of the church is not going to reverse course. It's not going to go back. It's this whole recognize and resist, like why exactly?
Like we're gonna hold back the tide, just our little selves,
right. It doesn't make any sense. A book that I'll recommend again at the end, and I know you've recommended before, but the book The Pope, the Council, and the Mass has some really great things to say about this. There's a quote from it. It says, "The Catholic Church does not, never has, and never will go back on the solemn decisions of her general councils arrived at with the assistance of the Holy Spirit. The unreality of the SSPX and of the extreme traditionalist positions on this matter should be evident to anyone who knows and understands what the true tradition of the Church really is." It just, we're not going to go, the Novus Ordo is not going to die out. For those of you who claim that, it's not going to get legislated away. It's not. It's just not. That is what it is. That's what we have. That makes up 99.9% of churches across the world. It is what it is, and I think it was just time for us to say, you know what, I'm tired of fighting this. I'm tired of resisting it. I'm tired of trying to do it the way that we want to do it. The church is our mother, right? That's what we say. We trust her. We trust that she is doing what's best for us. We trust that she's not going to lead us to something that's going to be harmful. And that's a whole other discussion I could get into. But we were just tired of trying to fight the movement. Pope Francis, I have a quote from him as well. He said back in 2017, he said, "It's not enough to reform the liturgical books. The mentality of the people must be reformed as well. There's still work to do in this direction, in particular, rediscovering the reasons for the decisions made with the liturgical reform." And this is key here: overcoming unfounded and superficial readings, partial receptions, and practices that disfigure it, which, we unfortunately do suffer from. But, and then this just, he just closes the book on it here. He says, "After this magisterium, after this long journey, we can affirm with certainty and with magisterial authority that the liturgical reform is irreversible." There it is from the Pope. It's not going away. It is what it is. It's what we have. It's a rough time right now, but that's what we have. And trying to preserve this, idealist, mentality of, we just need to go back to the way things were. We just, everything was fine before. Let's just reintroduce it. No, it's not going to work. It doesn't work like that. I have a whole barrage of quotes here, but
that's great. You're so well prepared.
Dr. Larry Chapp in his blog Gaudium et Spes 22. This quote is a little bit longer, but I really liked it. He said, "Modernity equals spiritual corrosion. Are we to believe then that somehow the Tridentine form of Catholicism, with its index of forbidden books, silencings of non-Thomistic theologies, massa damnata triumphalism, syllabi of errors, and its sloppy and perfunctory Latin liturgies would have been immune to that acid? That the dour message of mortal sins everywhere, especially sexual ones, and the ever-present danger of eternal damnation for most of us, was going to somehow light a fire of conversion in millions of people rather than the reverse?" He summed it up so well for me. I was like,
it's really good.
That's exactly what I experienced. That's exactly what my wife experienced. That's exactly what so many of my friends and family have experienced, is that right there. And it doesn't work. It's not like, I completely acknowledge and agree that there are issues that we have to deal with today. Right. And we're working our way there, we're getting there, but saying, "Oh, we made a mistake, turn around." I'm sorry. No, it doesn't work like that.
Right.
If 99.8% of the bishops in the entire world, agreed that this needed to be changed, that the Mass needed to be changed, I don't know where we get the gall to say otherwise. The claim that it was some diabolical plot by, the Freemasons or the communists or what have you, that just falls apart for me when you see that the entire church agreed that it needed to happen. 4 bishops, 4 said no. Yeah. Out of like 2,100 and something, I forget the exact number. But the mind of the church clearly thinks here that the Mass needs to be updated. So I don't want to hear it with this Mass of the Ages thing when all the bishops, even Archbishop Lefebvre, agree that it needed to be changed. I don't want to hear it. It's like, I understand and I completely acknowledge that it's a beautiful thing and we still go and we still have it available. And I'm very grateful for that. But, it was like they agreed it needed to be changed. And then people didn't like the change and they said, let's go back. It's no good. That's not how it works. Like, this is what we have and it's what we have to deal with. The whole thing, I have an analogy. Traditionalism kind of feels like homesteading to me, where, this kind of old traditional way of living, this kind of back to the land, very edifying experience, right? And I don't think it's a coincidence that I know a lot of people are getting into homesteading lately. It seems to kind of be taking off, but both are kind of a return to the way things used to be, a return to the life that people used to live, right? And I think that's wonderful. I think if that's what you want to do, go right ahead. That's great. You should, enjoy it, and that's great. But when you think your homestead is like the ideal way to live and you look down on everyone because they don't homestead, that's where I start having a problem, right? And when you start saying that, your homegrown vegetables are the only thing that will really sustain you, and my store-bought vegetables aren't going to sustain me, they're not good for me, they're not what I need, then I'm just like, okay, stop, please. I don't want to talk to you at that point, like,
right.
Homesteading is wonderful, and you should do it if you want to, and that's great, and I'm happy for you. And I might even be interested in participating if you just show me how much you like it and show me how great it is and all these things, right? But if you try to, shove it down my throat and explain to me why it's the only good thing, the only real way to live, and the only authentic thing, I don't want it.
Right. Right. That's why it's hard to evangelize people from a traditionalist standpoint, because it's hard to explain when you're not really living in the universal church. I mean, like, even if you exist in the church, like the FSSP families and stuff, they're in the church, but they're holding a lot of these ideas that are really like on the knife's edge of division. And so then you're like trying to tell people about the faith and share it with them and be all excited, and then be like, well, why don't you, practice like everybody else? Why don't you go to that? Well, we don't go to that church on purpose because we're doing something else, because we're traditional Catholics. Or if you're SSPX, it's even harder, because then it's like, well, the rest of the church kind of defected from the faith, and we're the only ones that really have it. So it's like, wait a second, why would that convince, especially, pardon me, a Protestant? Because it's just another form of Protestantism. It's like, I'm already doing that, and I'm happy where I am. So no thanks, I'm good.
Right. You're not offering me anything I don't already have, essentially. Yeah. So sorry, I've rambled on for quite a bit here. So if you had anything you wanted to go over before I keep going, then let me know.
Oh, I don't know. I think your quotes are so good. I want to hear more.
Okay. Well, I've got more. So, so, as I've kind of said, and, I experienced this, my wife did, many of my family and friends did, these traditionalist communities that we grew up in really kind of hammered us with, facts and memorization and trivia and book knowledge, but really didn't explain how to apply this knowledge or how to synthesize our faith with everyday life and everyday practices, right? I knew absolutely nothing about the covenant or the significance of, ancient Jewish history and practices, or the temple sacrifice, or anything like that, right? We could, I could rattle off the, the Baltimore definition, or the Baltimore Catechism definition of what a virtue is, but I couldn't tell you what it actually is, or how to practice it, or how it's applied in your daily life, right? It's, as I'm sure you're aware, in traditionalist communities, modesty is the virtue that is harped on the most, but it's just measured in terms of, hemlines. How long is your skirt? How revealing is your outfit, right? It's not a mental thing. It's
primarily external, which is what they're good at. They're good at
exactly. It's primarily external, and it's just like the whole thing just felt like don't do these things because they're mortal sins. Memorize these Bible quotes for when Protestants happen to engage with you, and make sure you're attending the Latin Mass. Right? There was no life to it. It felt kind of stagnant in hindsight. Again, quote from Edward Street in A Biblical Walk Through the Mass. He says, the Christian path is not merely a via negativa, or a negative path of avoiding sinful thoughts, words, desires, and actions. Christianity is ultimately about the imitatio Christi, or the imitation of Christ. It's not enough to avoid breaking the rules. We must learn to love like Jesus. We must put on Christ and his virtues. Jesus does not want us to merely avoid sin. He wants us to grow in his self-giving love. I'm sorry, but traditionalism did not teach me this. I did not get that. I got a checklist. I got, check these boxes, do these things, follow these rules, and you'll be fine.
Right.
There was no authentic life or growth to it. And in hindsight, after 20 plus years in it, and after the last year or so, and I'm finally realizing it, I was just thinking, that's not what I want. And that's not what I want for my kids. Right.
Right. Well, it's interesting that you hang on to the faith, even though, like, you believed in it enough, it was sincere enough for you that you maintained your practice, but a lot of people don't. Actually, most young people don't raise like that. And so, like, in your own family, I don't know if this is coming later, I don't want to throw you off your outline, but you're in the church still, but are all your siblings?
Unfortunately, no. 2 of my siblings no longer practice, and I've talked to both of them about it, and this mentality, and I don't want to cast blame on anybody, like on my parents for putting us in that world. But I know, one of my siblings said it's that exclusionary kind of isolationist attitude that really did it, because, once she got out and got a job and got out into the real world a little bit, she was like, this is not what I was told it would be. This is not how I was not prepared for this. I was not prepared to interact and engage with this. This is the case with them and with many other people I know who have fallen away from the, from the faith, from traditionalism. It's not particular points of the Catholic faith that they have issue with. It's the traditionalist mindset and the traditionalist upbringing that they have a problem with. And that's what gets them to leave. It's not because they, have an issue with a certain dogma or a certain practice or whatever, right? It's because of this kind of bubble world that they break out of, and they say that was all a bunch of nonsense. So
they never got to even experience like complete Catholicism. So all they know about the church is traditionalism, and it wasn't enough to hold them, to make them want to hang on. And so it's like they're just having to judge by their own experience, but they don't even know what it's really like. Like you're saying, they're not rejecting the church, they're rejecting what they think is the church. But they've missed out. I know I've talked to people like that too. And I'm like, you've never actually been Catholic. Like you thought you were, but it's like, you never even got to experience it. Like, I'm so sorry, because that's not it. And they're like, well, yeah, like maybe they've even been told that before, but they don't know what to do. Like, where do I start? How do I get my heart back in? Because it's just so, no,
certainly. And I think I mentioned this to you on a phone call recently, but I was kind of going through the SSPX crisis videos to see if there were, anything I could bring into this. And one of them, they make the claim that, the new form of the Mass is what's to blame for, for smaller families and for children leaving and for, kids no longer practicing the faith. And I was like, I'm sorry, that's just not true. That's just not true. I know many traditionalist, large families, 10, 12 kids, where the majority of the kids just leave. They don't practice anymore. I mean, I've seen it many times. This idea that a certain form of the Mass is what's to blame for this is just ridiculous. It just is. And they don't even, and it's not even as if these kids leave for, Protestantism or for some other religion. They just stop practicing. So it's not the religion that they have a problem with. It's just that they leave and they go, yep, didn't like that, and they just stop. So that was an eye opener as well. And I think I've mentioned that, we're not, my wife and my wife and I don't want to reject these, traditional elements that we grew up with and just like, shove it all to the side. We grew up with a really good foundation of, I remember when I forget how old I was, but, just a local Catholic I met who, didn't like know what a scapular was. And I was like, that's like a basic part of my, like, I got that when I was 6, there were things like that, like, the scapular and, learning Latin, which I'm eternally grateful for because my degree is in English and it really helped me with my language skills, right? There are all these things that really did set a good foundation and I'm very grateful for those. I think we can separate the particulars from the mindset as a whole. And I was like, I want my kids to have those particulars. I want my kids to be able to, to study Latin or to, be able to attend the old form of the Mass and all these things and get the things that I got, but just not in the world that I got them in. You know what I mean?
Right. Your kids will have a much more full experience because you know what to take from both that will help them. And you're not going to like try to shut things out because you're not afraid. You're not living in fear of contamination and
right.
stuff.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. We have, in where I moved to, we have, many beautiful churches. There's a Byzantine church in town. There's, there's a Latin Mass within easy driving distance. There's an Anglican ordinariate not that far away. Like there's a wide range of stuff that we can show them. We say, look, this is all, you can have all of this. You can have all of it.
Right.
And, and I want them to be able to experience all of it and not hold them back from things because they're not traditional. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't want them to not be able to go to a Mass at the local cathedral because it's not a traditional Mass, right? Like I want them to be able to go and experience these things.
Right.
But if you bring them up in a traditionalist world, that's frowned upon. So Yeah,
I even
that's
talked
kind
to a
of
traditionalist priest one time who was saying, we're in this order, and when the chrism mass happens every year, we have to go, but because they're traditionalist priests, they don't concelebrate because they only say the 1962. So he's like, so we just kind of like, stand in the back and sort of put in our time, and then when it's over, we leave. It's like
man.
that's what they do to get by. Not all of them probably, but it
Mhm.
is kind of like, it's weird. It is honestly weird to me that they aren't at the point yet where priests in traditionalist seminaries learn to say both forms of the mass, so they can concelebrate at the chrism mass every year with
Right.
their bishop and all the other priests. It's like, that's a little weird. I mean,
Right.
you don't even know how to do it, or you absolutely refuse to do it, and you're a priest of the church, and this is like the norm of the
Right.
liturgy. Definitely feel like there could be some improvement there.
Right.
But
Right. Yep. Exactly.
okay. Okay. Awesome. No, this is
Um,
good. I was like, oh, I had a
this is
question in my head, and then it
yeah.
wouldn't.
Sorry.
I know.
I'm reaching the end of my my notes here, but I did want to again put in a plug for this book. I know you've
Oh,
recommended it on your
I love
channel
that book.
before.
Mhm.
If you have grown up in the traditionalist movement, please, please, please do yourself a favor and get this book. Please do.
Yeah.
I
The
mean, it
Political
is,
Council and the Mass. It's
yes.
James Lakutis and Kenneth Whitehead, I
And
think,
Kenneth
are the
Whitehead.
authors. We actually have a question that's kind of related. I was thinking of this book when I saw this question. He said, could you guys address the charge that the new Mass makes you Protestant? Also, doesn't Protestant mean that you rebel against the legitimate authority of the church?
Yeah, the Protestant accusation, I think, is very superficial. Number one, these people who are throwing out the accusation of this makes you Protestant, I want to say, have you ever actually been to a Protestant service? Because I'm willing to bet that you have not, and you have some vague idea in your head of what Protestant service looks like, right?
Or like
And
they're all the same.
right,
Yeah.
right, exactly. But
Mhm.
I will point out again in this book, they make a point of saying that there are the Protestants, back 50 or so years ago, this very question is addressed in this book, and there were Protestants saying, yeah, no, this new form of the Mass is very distinctly Catholic. People love to throw out the accusation that Protestants were involved with forming, which I don't think is entirely accurate. But I want to say, well, I mean, there were some involved, but I don't think to the capacity that some people think they were.
Mhm.
And also, several of them converted after participating in this whole thing because they saw how authentically Catholic it was.
Oh,
So
man.
that's just, I think that's just silly. And then also, the new Mass, I think for anyone who does a cursory amount of liturgical history will see it's almost identical to how the early Christians worship for like the first millennium of the church.
Yes.
There's nothing in there that's just made up, right? Like, you're under the impression when you're a little kid that the sign of peace is some funky like hippie thing from the 70s. No, they did that in like the 2nd century in the church and did it for a very long time, right?
Yeah.
It's
Right.
things like this that, maybe aesthetically they feel Protestant, but they are not Protestant. And if you actually look into the history behind them and the meaning behind them, they've been around for a long time.
That's why the Protestants have them, because
Right.
we had them first. And some of them those things that the Protestants maintained, like they maintained them, they fell out of practice in our liturgy. And the
Mhm.
church is like, I mean, there was so much, like they discovered archaeological artifacts and churches and things, and like the Didache that they didn't think they'd ever find. And
Mhm.
it's like all these things that they're like, oh my gosh, or like that prayer at the end of the Our Father that people are like, oh my gosh, that's just so that we pray the Our Father like the Protestants. It's like,
Yep.
actually, that's word for word from the Didache, which is
Mhm.
the earliest like liturgical document we have. So that means they were praying it that way back then, and it's all scriptural. So it's like,
Mhm.
it's in there, it's ours.
Yep.
They're borrowing it. Like
Yep.
it's okay, and yeah, we don't have to be threatened, and it's okay to look maybe more like like we once did. And if that
Mhm.
makes us look Protestant, it's like, well, the Protestants came later, and
Yeah.
maybe it works out if they feel like this is more familiar to me. I can get into this easier because
Mhm.
it's more like, maybe, I don't want to say genuine Christian worship. It's more, well, it's more traditional even
Mhm.
than what we had before, because all this, like the empires and the Middle Ages, the courtliness and all that stuff that kind of inbred into the liturgy, those customs and things. It's like, and it's very Western European, and
Yep.
it's very, yeah, like courtly, and it's like, we're in a completely different time. We're in a very universal church. I mean, yes,
Mhm.
that liturgy evangelized pretty much the whole world, but it makes a lot of sense that it would need to kind of adapt or be a little more,
Right. And I would say it kind of has a knock-on effect, because I mean, at least for me, I was looking into all these things of like, why did we put this new response in there? Why, where did the sign of peace come from? All these things, which in turn helped me to do, study of the liturgy, which helped me to understand it better, which helped me be engaged with the mass more, which helped me appreciate the new form of the mass more. Like, it has a knock-on effect. And if you understand where these things are coming from and the history behind them and their significance in the liturgy, it's actually really enriching. And I think this accusation that it's Protestant is, like you said, they stole it from us, for one. And maybe it feels more aesthetically Protestant than what you're used to in like the old form of the mass, but the fact is it's not. Maybe it feels like it, but I think, not to sound blunt, but I think you just need to do some research on it.
Yeah, it's true. But like you were saying about the armchair experts that just kind of sit back and are like, oh, look at this. This isn't as it should be. Well, maybe they'll figure it out someday. I find those people a lot of places and they don't really want to put out the effort. So it's just a lot easier to talk about it and pronounce while being ignorant. And that there is this sort of general atmosphere I find in trad land where people are like, they think of themselves as very educated because they know, like you said, the Baltimore Catechism and things like that. I can list the precepts of the church, the 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit, whatever. And I bet most Novus Ordo Catholics can't do that. It's like, well, maybe they can't, but maybe they have more of the spirit of Catholicism, even if they can't explain it perfectly, but maybe they're showing it better in their lives. And that's why, millions and millions of people come into the church every year, mostly through the Novus Ordo, because of people that they've met from that world.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, sorry. The second part of this question, I guess, is a little different. So doesn't Protestant mean that you rebel against the legitimate authority of the church?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you're protesting.
Yep, exactly. It's, you don't get to decide what the ideal is or what the, how things should be done. We have a church and a hierarchy to do that for us. Right. And we should be trusting of them. Great segue again into another quote from this book that I had at the ready. So this book says, if the church decides through her competent authorities to officially institute that which we might otherwise be tempted to question, we nevertheless can be entirely at peace in our consciences, because we know that the Holy Spirit would not allow the duly constituted authorities of the church in officially promulgated acts guaranteed by the Holy See to lead us astray on anything that might jeopardize our eternal salvation. Like, listen to the church, guys. She really is looking out for you. She really is trying to help you. She's not trying to drag you down as much as these, like you said, armchair theologians are trying to convince you of. That's just not happening.
Yeah. And the Protestants of today are not the same as the Protestants of yesteryear, the original ones, because most of them have just inherited that belief system that they have. They don't hold it in relation to or against what the church holds. It's like, well, this is Christianity. This is my faith. The Protestants of today are probably more truly the traditionalist, like the rad trads, because they're definitely protesting and, condemning things in the church and stuff. It's like, but we still aren't used to calling them that because they go by Catholic and we still slip into that terminology. I mean, it's a big deal when you use terms incorrectly. And it really changes the way you think about things.
Absolutely.
So, can I ask you a question?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, okay. So on the phone, we were talking about, you mentioned, I think it came from St. John Bosco, who said one time that like 1 in every 3 kids has a religious vocation. Okay. And you mentioned this to me on the phone. You were like, yeah, like that was preached at us and stuff. And then you talked about like living in trad world, how limited your resources were in that regard. And then like looking around other people and you're like, why don't we have more vocations if this is really what we're living by? Cool.
Yes. And thank you for bringing that up, because I'd forgotten about that point. And so, for us growing up, a religious vocation meant, going to the fraternity church. A religious vocation meant that, if you want to become a nun, you go up to Gower in Missouri with the Benedictines. If you want to become a monk, you go to Clear Creek. And if you want to become a priest, you go to the seminary in Nebraska. Like, there was no exposure to any of these other religious orders or groups or anything, no diocesan stuff, because, it was trad world. You become traditional, you stay in that world. Right. And and we had no resources available to us to say, look at all these different groups with their different charisms and with their different with their different talents that you could be a part of, but it's not an option because they're not traditional, right? And looking, in hindsight, that I think was and is really damaging, that you're depriving, potentially depriving people of their vocation because they're not given much outside of this little realm, right? And I think I mentioned to you on the phone, I have a very, very large family, very large, many cousins, right?
Yeah.
I have one cousin who's a nun and one cousin who just went off to the monastery. 2 out of literally hundreds.
Whoa.
Yeah. Huh. So and we all grew up in this traditionalist movement, right? And I'm not saying that anybody rejected a vocation or that anybody wasn't open to, I that's not my place to say. I'm just saying we all got that line. 1 out of every 3 boys is going to be a priest. And I said, well, at this rate, we should have about 24 priests in our family, and we do not. So
it doesn't fit the rhetoric. So you're like, well, what does that mean? I mean, not like, like you say, not that anybody's ignoring their vocation, but it's like, where is this coming from? Why is it being taught? Like, this expectation. And then they talk about the rest of the church and the vocations crisis and, or all these people that left. And it's like, but if you guys are doing everything right and you've got all your ducks in a row, why aren't you bursting at the seams with vocations? Because it's not the case anywhere.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I know the fraternity seminary is, I think, doing fairly well, but there is not this, explosion in vocations that, you'd think they would have if everything was, all great. So,
And the SSPX, they've ordained 1,400 priests since they were started. They have less than 700 active now. So where'd they all go?
What does that say?
Yeah. It's kind of interesting how when you point a finger, it always ends up turning back around. Like it's kind of, I have lived that. So
for sure.
Oh man. Another thing I wondered, you talked to me a little bit more about sort of the kinds of people that you met in traditionalism, especially like the kids you went to school with and in college, and like their behavior or their attitude towards their faith and stuff. And you told a story about like an English class paper about purgatory. And, I don't know if you want to tell any.
Yes, I do. This was another thing during my college years that really made me just raise an eyebrow and say, wait, what? So at Kent State University, there was I was in a creative nonfiction class, and there was someone from St. Mary's was in the class with me, and a girl in class was, a Catholic. She went to the local campus church, and she wanted to do her paper on purgatory. And this other person, this person from St. Mary's got very excited and said, I can share some resources with her, and I can help her out and all this stuff. And then she capped that conversation with, because, they don't believe the same things that we do, so we have to help them out. And I said, I'm sorry, what? What are you talking about? Of course they believe the same things that we do. I don't understand. Like, that just baffled me.
Right.
And I think I even said, well, no, they do. They, sure, maybe they don't have some of the book knowledge that we have, but they believe the same things that we do. But that's what I'm saying. And this person, I don't want to give any information, but, this person was, in their early 20s. Like they feed you this kind of stuff even into adulthood, and you believe this stuff into adulthood. Like, you believe things because you have no reason to question them. But if you actually take a step back and look at it objectively, it's like, that makes no sense. And you should say that again and try to explain it to me.
Right. Yeah. But being so isolated, and if you're being propagandized, you wouldn't know any different. And you've been taught that the people telling you these things are trustworthy. So it's really not until you get out, like, you got to see a bunch of different communities with your wife and moving around, and it really gave you perspective, which is, I mean, that word is just like such a hallmark of this whole issue. It's like no perspective because you're so shut off. You're so limited.
Yep. And I like to think that, my decisions are, founded on good ground, because I've been around the block. I've been with many different groups. I've seen it all, and after experiencing all of it, and I'm saying this is where we want to go. We just attend our local diocesan church, and we go to Latin Mass, on occasion, and we still have all these traditional practices, and we still value all these things. But I was just like, I'm over trying to orient my life around a particular form of a particular rite. I'm orienting my life around Jesus Christ, and Jesus Christ is present in the tabernacle at my local church a mile away. And, they may do some little things like,
Sorry.
No, you're okay. They may do some little things that I don't necessarily love, like, extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion, or, or the tabernacle is slightly off to the side, which I'm not a huge fan of, but like, okay, Jesus is still inside,
Yes.
So I'm just, I'm over trying to center my life around that. And instead of just accepting that I am being looked after, I am being assisted by the church, it's fine.
Awesome. Here, there is another question. I don't know if you're going to know the answer to this. I sure won't. Great video. As you mentioned, St. Mary's in Kansas. Did you know its former attendee, Barbara Rue, who Archbishop Sheen personally wrote to warning about the SSPX? Did she say anything else of it, about Fulton Sheen's views of the society?
I did not know her, but I have seen that letter. For those who are wondering, for those who are watching, yes, Archbishop Fulton Sheen wrote a letter to this woman, Barbara, who she had told him that her friend had started attending the SSPX. Archbishop Fulton Sheen wrote back and said, I believe his words were, "If you have any influence over your friend, I would beg you to convince her to not attend there." He said, "Do not let her attend." And listen, I very much respect Archbishop Fulton Sheen. I think he is a wonderful man. He's a great man. And if he says to stay away from them, not to mention that the popes have said to stay away from them, listen, that's good enough for me. I'm not having anything to do with them.
Well, earlier up here, the same person said Archbishop Fulton Sheen was correct when he said it was a cult. After we were talking. Yeah, that's actually a word that he did use in that letter. And so it's interesting that when you were hitting on that, they put that in the chat, because they were like, oh, dang.
Yep, I didn't know he used that word, but it's like I said, some of those criteria are undeniably there, and it's not even me making this up. It's like, like what I mentioned about when they say, cults will say the ends justify the means. That exact tagline is used in their classrooms when they're explaining their position. I mean, I've heard it
which is
many times.
Totally opposite Catholic Moral Theology 101, like St. Thomas Aquinas. Like how do they reconcile that? It's crazy. But I mean, from their foundations, that was the whole legitimizing of their inception was. I know. Sorry, I'm like confusing Lefebvre and Fulton Sheen. Okay, Lefebvre is like. It's up to me to save the church, and I'm going to do this even though it's directly against the Pope, and I'm going to do stuff over and over and over and over that I'm not supposed to do, because that's what you have to do to save the church. And it's like, wow. I mean, it's really not as complicated as trads make it sound, especially SSPXers, because issues they're pretty basic. And that right there should show you what that.
I'll again default to Fulton Sheen, who to counter that said, "You don't save the church saves you."
Ding.
I mean, that's a rebuttal right there.
Yeah, right.
So,
right, awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad you recommended that book, The Pope, the Council, and the Mass. That thing is loaded, and so you'll definitely go through a lot of material just from that, and share it with all your trad friends.
It answers every trad objection and talking point you have ever heard. I mean, the quo primum thing, the Protestantized thing, the look, everything tanked after Vatican II, so Vatican II bad thing. Like every single talking point you've heard, it addresses them very thoroughly, and I might add, very charitably too. They're not here to dunk on on the trads. They say we've heard these questions many times. We get it. We see it. I understand that these are issues, but the way to go about them is to stay with the church, right? And I want to circle back really quick just to I like I said earlier, I hesitate to just slap the cult label on, because I have family members, I have friends who are in that, and I don't want to just be wagging my finger and saying you're in a cult, right? But please, I like, do yourself a favor, look at these criteria, look up the criteria, and tell me that the SSPX doesn't exhibit that behavior.
Right.
because
I'll
you
put the link
can't.
in the description below to that
Yes.
ICSA website because that's got the 15 things.
Yeah. Father, I never know how to pronounce his last name, but Father Dwight Longenecker, I think is his last name, also has a list of cult criteria that, again, it's he says, they have a nice facade on the outside, but they're tumultuous on the inside. Or if there's this like kind of victim mentality of like, we're the only, we're being persecuted, and we're the only real thing left, we're the only true believers left, or whatever. I don't remember them all off the top of my head, but even he hits on these things. And
something about leading by fear too, like really instilling fear in people. There's a huge fear factor. And I mean, scrupulosity and the scary stories, and you're in danger of hellfire all the time. Like, I mean, like that is just huge focus in there.
Yeah. I mean, I know of kids in church will be sitting like this, and they'll be told, don't do that because your fingers are pointing downward, and that means you're praying to the devil.
Whoa.
It's stuff like that.
Wow.
It's stuff like that.
It's like just paranoia.
Yeah.
Like
it's leading by anxiety and fear. I mean, there's, people are scared to leave St. Mary's. People are scared to be seen at other local churches because of the backlash that they will experience. That is not healthy. That is not good. That is just a huge red flag, or should be, to anyone who just look at it objectively. That is bad. That should not be happening. And if you find yourself in that situation, I really would beg you to step back and maybe reevaluate that situation.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Because God does not want you to live in fear. Perfect love casts out all fear. And that whole environment, it's just like how toxic that can be for people. I mean, it's really religious trauma. And it's so weird because I noticed this very obviously. People in the situation, they're like, oh, it's not a cult. People say it's a cult. It's not. We're fine. But once people leave and they look back, they're like, oh, it was totally a cult. Oh my God. That is like the defining word I keep running into. They're like, yeah. So it's like, well, who do we believe? The people in it or the people out of it that have experience with it? I mean, it's a little bit.
You'll see many people, many ex-SSPXers describing it as a cult. And I don't think that's for nothing.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, it'd be good to learn more about that and kind of just set those principles up, and how, traditionalist groups fill them, and then how the rest of the church, like according to her teachings, does the contrary, because it's a great thing. And and this site that we're referring to, they're not anti-Christian, anti-Catholic, like they're pro like long established religion. They're talking about, and they keep their eyes on like they call them NRMs, new religious movements, like different kind of more modern groups that spring up and that have more of a kind of a fanatical focus. And and they have resources too on their site. Like there's a book about for people that have been hurt in religious groups, religious cult groups. I don't remember what the book is called, but it sounded great. I was like, wow, that would be kind of a good thing to get into, because maybe you just don't even know how hurt you've been by that, or how it's changed the basic way that you think and view God and yourself and, your eternity. It's like, I've talked to people who are like, heaven, I'm not motivated to go to heaven because what I think of as heaven, it's like not worth thinking about, because but that's how they were raised. It's like you fear hell, but heaven's kind of like not really that great either.
Heaven's where we all sit in the clouds and play harps, and then they don't explain it any further than that.
Yeah, right. And I mean, there's not a whole lot out there about heaven. I mean, it's kept a surprise for a reason, but it's supposed to be a great surprise. Like that's the point of it. And God is all about that, but it's supposed to be delightful, but we're supposed to delight in God. And if that's not where our faith is taking us, you can bet it's going to dry up and crumble away.
And I'll again point to, like I was saying earlier, reading more, modern authors like Scott Hahn, The Lamb's Supper, talking about how the book of Revelation is tied in with the Mass and what the Mass is and how to experience it. And I was like, this is amazing. And I never got this. My cousin, who also grew up in St. Mary's, I remember recently she had just said that she had just read the Lamb's Supper, and she's like, I'm so mad that we didn't get this kind of thing growing up, because, I mean, at least for me, after reading that and after reading other resources, I was just telling my sister the other day, I like going to Mass now. I like make an effort to go like as often as I can, because I genuinely enjoy it and I genuinely grow from it. But growing up, it was like, check the box, fulfilled my Sunday obligation, check the box.
Right.
And I'm not blaming anyone for that. That's my own fault. I didn't, I didn't try to get engaged with it. I didn't, I didn't try to learn more about it. And, it's no one's fault but my own. But, I think it's just a good illustration to those people who would say that, everything is great in Tradland, and that will bring you up to, up in your faith. And I'm like, well, no, it won't. It's not you need Jesus. And if you're not, if you're not connected to him, if you're just going to mass, then it can be the most beautiful solemn high mass you've ever been to. But if you're not with Jesus, you're not going to get anything out of it.
It's true. It's all about relationship. I mean, not to sound hokey, but it shouldn't sound hokey.
Yeah.
We're not hippies. Like this is our patrimony. Like, union with God. And like you read the mystics and they're crazy in love with God. It's all about the summit of love and ecstasy and all these. You're like, whoa, am I even comfortable with this? Like one time my mom said to me, she was thinking about it after mass. She was thinking about communion and just kind of meditating on like the Eucharist and what it is to receive communion. She's like, this is kind of shocking that we do this at church. I mean, the lights are on, there's people all around, and we're like going up and like, consummating our union with God in the Eucharist. And it's like, that's kind of like an incredible thought. It's like, only God would think of that because he loves us so much. But it's all about love. It's not about checking boxes. It's not about do this or die.
Right.
I mean, man.
Right. I mean, God literally is a relationship. He is relationship, right? And once you start looking into, the theology behind that, and I mean, I won't go off on another rant here, but that was another thing that, growing up is, you got Baltimore Catechism, you got some church history at SSPX, you got, their defenses of why they're right, but no even like basic theology of any kind. And I had to start doing reading on my own and research on my own to really grasp, reading the Theology of the Body and reading Scott Hahn and reading all these things. And it was like, I get it now. I understand it now and I actually want it now, but I didn't get this for 20 years of traditionalism. And it's not a one-off, right? It's not just me. I mean, my wife was the same way. Like I said, I have many friends and family who have been the exact same way. It's not an isolated incident. It's total. I mean, it's the whole thing,
Right. So a lot of what you were given growing up, it was good. I mean, and it was almost all good, but it was missing some really key things. So that's all you want. You want your kids to you want the whole package. So that's what you're going for. And that's awesome.
Yep.
Would you mind sharing if there's any like specific books that you haven't mentioned or, resources that you would recommend to other people to kind of help them unpack some of this stuff? Because I know you're doing like a lot of history, the liturgy stuff right now. And
so I haven't checked to see if it's here yet, but the Liturgy Betrayed that you mentioned by I'm gonna mess up his name because it's French, but just look up the book, The Liturgy Betrayed. I'm very excited to read that. I've heard really good things, and that should be in my mailbox like right now. There's that book, The Pope, the Council, and the Mass. There's The Lamb's Supper by Scott Hahn. There's The Fourth Cup by Scott Hahn. There's I know for my wife really enjoys listening to Pints with Aquinas, and all the long form discussions there. What else? I'm trying to think of. There's a book called The Mass of the Early Christians, which is talking about the earliest records that we have of the liturgy and people's understanding of the Eucharist and all these things. Wonderful book. I can't get enough of it. There's what else is on my bookshelf? It's gotten very full over the last year or so. Oh man.
If you think of it later, if you can't think of it now, I can always put it in the description.
Yeah, I may have to send you some more, but
good.
Let's see. Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis is excellent. I remember that's the one that, when I was engaged and I was looking to, do some kind of not marriage prep, but like kind of spiritual preparation. I read that book and I was like, everything just clicked. Everything clicked for me when I read that book. And I understand it's not going to affect everybody the same way. Everyone responds to things differently, but that book was just phenomenal.
Well, Lewis was thinking his way into the church. I mean, according to his secretary, who worked with him for a long time, he said if he had lived much longer, he would have entered the church.
Yeah, so I absolutely believe that.
Yeah. Yep. Cool. Oh, awesome. Well, thank you, Andrew. This is great.
Yeah. Absolutely. This has been really great. I've needed to kind of vocalize this stuff for a while, so I'm glad I can get it out there in some kind of a public forum. This is great.
Sure. No, thanks for coming on. Maybe we'll get to do some more videos later on. But thank you everyone for coming and watching and supporting us. And hopefully we'll get some more good things up for you soon. And yeah, check back and there will be more interviews and more resources for you guys. But thank you again and God bless you. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Laura.
All right.